Hello students, I want to welcome you to the Writing Lab, Session 1 for Tri-State Bible College from the Office of Academics. I'm so pleased that you are watching this Writing Lab. It is our aim to help you to fulfill your ministry, and part of that is to help you to become an excellent writer during your studies at Tri-State Bible College. All of us come into the college with various skills and levels of writing, and what we want to do through the Writing Lab is to use it as an accompanying feature to your classes to help you to succeed at writing papers and completing assignments. So let's get started. This is the first session of the Writing Lab, and it will cover basics of writing a paper. We'll have a session 2 that will become a little bit more advanced in the content that it covers, focusing on research writing and particularly Turabian formatting. First, we want to discuss the basic paper structure. Basic paper structure involves 3 parts. We could add several other parts. However, for just a basic paper structure, we want to hone our skills in on these 3: the introduction, the body, and the conclusion of a paper. In the introduction, you are telling the reader what you're going to say. It's like a movie trailer or a preview. In the body, you are going to say it. You are going to say in detail what it is you told the reader you were going to say. If this was a sandwich, the introduction and the conclusion would be the bun, but the body would be the meat and the toppings. And then finally, in your conclusion, you want to tell the reader what you have told them. This is a summary of what you have written in the body and what you previewed in the introduction. Here are a few tips in your basic paper structure. Tip number 1, decide what order is best for your writing style. Some people prefer to write the body first and the conclusion, and then return and write the introduction so that you can properly preview what it is that you have written. Tip number 2, before you write, make an outline or list of what you want to say. You don't have to go right into writing your paper. Even handwriting a basic outline of what you hope to say can be helpful to get you started in writing your paper. Organize and rearrange it, and then write. And finally, tip number 3, the hardest part about writing for every writer is to start writing. Part of the wall to getting into your paper is just starting. Even if you're not going to keep what you initially write, it is always good to just get something on paper, or in our case, many times, something on the screen. Next, let's talk about basic sentence and paragraph composition. For some of us, these are things we remember from high school, even as far back as junior high and elementary school. However, sometimes we don't pay too close attention in high school and in elementary and middle school education. Sometimes we didn't have the best education in those grades. And for some of us, it's been a long time since we've been in that classroom. And so we want to review here basic sentence and paragraph composition. The most basic sentence includes a subject and a verb. For example, Jesus wept. This is a complete sentence. It has a subject, Jesus, and it has a verb, wept. Another example is Jamie slept. Again, there's a subject, Jamie, and the verb, slept. More complex sentences add descriptors or clarifiers to the basic sentence structure. Here are some examples from the first example that we gave above, Jamie slept. Jamie slept poorly. Poorly is an adverb that modifies or describes the verb slept. Jamie slept on the floor. The prepositional phrase here, on the floor, modifies or describes more clearly the situation of Jamie's sleeping. Jamie, having been up all night, slept soundly. Here we have several descriptors. First, Jamie is described a little bit more thoroughly. He had been up all night. We see this with the participial phrase, having been up all night. And then secondly, we see another adverb, soundly, describing the kind of sleep implied in the verb slept. Sometimes the verb needs the clarity of an object. An object can be direct or indirect. For example, Susan hit the ball. Ball is the direct object. It is the object that is the object of the verb hit. Here's another example with both a direct object and an indirect object. Susan gave the kids a ball. Here, kids is an indirect object of the verb gave because the direct object is ball. Again, Susan gave a ball. She gave a ball to the kids. And so here we have both a direct object and an indirect object. The standard paragraph, moving on from sentences to paragraph construction now, the standard paragraph should contain between 3 to 5 sentences. A paragraph should state and develop one idea or line of thought. So, if you have a paragraph that has one sentence or 2 sentences, it's really not enough content to develop a line of thought. However, if you include 10 sentences in one single paragraph, that is too much. It's overstated. You either need to break that into 2 paragraphs or edit and minimize what it is you're saying about that particular thought. Next, let's move on to some ideas that are presented in the book, The Elements of Style. This book, I'll show it to you here. It's written by William Strunk Jr. and E.B. White. This is the 4th edition. This is a classic volume on elements of style, and we'll take just a few ideas from this book. Obviously, it's much more thorough in the book itself, but we'll highlight a few of the ideas here in this writing lab. So, ideas from the elements of style. Now, everybody loves style. I mean, I'm a huge Bengals fan. Obviously, I'm really excited about Joe Burrow, the new quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals. And something that's always in the news is what is it that Joe is wearing to the game, all right? So Joe likes to change his style up each game. And just for comic relief here, we're just highlighting that, hey, people pay attention to style. You want to always, as a writer, keep developing your style and your ability to present information and positions in writing. And so Strunk and White help us initially with some elementary rules of usage. For example, for the possessive singular of nouns, use apostrophe S. Sometimes this can be demonstrated by saying the ball of Sam or the salad from Chick-fil-A. We could say this a little more succinctly by saying Sam's ball or Chick-fil-A's salad. Next, be consistent with comma usage in your writing. At Tri-State Bible College, we differ from Strunk and White on this particular element of usage. We prefer the use of the Oxford comma. And if you're not sure what that is, I'll describe it to you. let's say that you are writing a list of things, much like, say, the list in Galatians 5 when Paul has a list of the works of the flesh or the fruit of the Spirit. So let's say I'm using this in a sentence. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, and gentleness. Let's say I just cut it off there. Love, joy, peace, patience, and gentleness. I would put a comma between each item in that list, and I would also put a comma on the item that comes right before the conjunction and then I would conclude the list with my final item, period. And so the Oxford comma is a comma that comes right before the conjunction and in a list of items. When writing parenthetically, that is, you're writing a sentence and you want to give a little comment or clarification or a little bit more description. It's not really part of the sentence, but you really feel like it's important to add it. You can use a number of ways to include that content. You can use parentheses, you can use commas, or you can use the em dash on each side of the content. Remember that there's no space between words and an em dash that's right up against each other. So whatever you use, parentheses, commas, or em dashes, make sure that you are consistent throughout your paper. Don't vacillate between one or the other. Just use the same thing throughout. Strunk and White recommend that you use commas. That's totally fine. It is a punctuation that is less noticeable and maybe a bit more pleasing to the reader. So we would jive with that. It's good to place a comma before a conjunction, and, but, or, when introducing an independent clause. This is proper. If you're going to have a complete sentence here and then another complete sentence here, you should have, for example, Sally hit the ball, comma, and she ran to first base. Two independent clauses joined together by a comma and the conjunction and. Finally, on this slide, do not join independent clauses with a comma. That is, if you're just going to say, Sally hit the ball, she ran to second base, you can't use a comma to separate those two independent sentences or clauses. What you can use is a semicolon. A semicolon can be used to separate two independent clauses. Some more elementary rules of usage that are helpful when you're writing. Use a colon after an independent clause to introduce a list of particulars, and a positive, an amplification, or an illustrative quotation. So a colon comes after a sentence, but you want to use the colon to give, like it's listed here, a list of particulars about this independent clause. There are many pieces of equipment in the game of baseball, colon, a glove, comma, a bat, comma, a uniform, comma, and so on and so forth. You can also use it when there's an appositive. You can also use a comma to do this, or a colon. So if we were to say, let me think, we could say that we worship the one true God, colon, Father, comma, Son, comma, and Spirit. So really that whole thing there is an appositive to God. They all refer to the same being, the same entity. So while that seems like a list, it's actually an appositive because God is Father, Son, and Spirit. An amplification, you want to amplify something you said in the clause, you want to amplify it further, which can in terms of style, bring an emphasis to something, or an illustrative quote can do the same thing. Use a dash to set off an abrupt break or interruption, and to announce along a positive or summary. A dash can also sort of functioning like a colon in this instance. The number of the subject, singular or plural, determines the number of the verb, singular or plural. For example, the students attend class, or the student attends class. Notice that the subject's singularity or plurality is governing the singularity or plurality of the verb in each of those examples. This is really important. Being a son of Appalachia and residing here, growing up here, this is oftentimes a struggle. It still can be for me. And I have found from professors and conversations with professors that subject-verb agreement is something that can be a struggle. So we want to really focus on this. It would be good reading material for you to read more about subject-verb agreement. It will make you such a better writer if you can get a handle on subject-verb agreement. Use the proper case of pronouns. Make sure that your pronoun is correctly coordinated to the referent, that is, the term to which it refers. A participial phrase at the beginning of a sentence must refer to the grammatical subject. So, for example, I mentioned Jamie, having been up all night, slept soundly. Had I rearranged that just a bit and said, having been up all night, comma, Jamie slept soundly, you can see how the participial phrase at the beginning of my sentence does modify the grammatical subject. So that's what this particular rule of elementary rule of usage means. Now let's talk a little bit about composition, transition a bit. We want to make sure that we're choosing a suitable design and hold to it. So we want our paper to look uniform. We don't want it to look scattered or disorienting or disorderly. We should have a common design to our paper. Many times your professor will tell you the kind of design that they would prefer. When we get into the later writing lab about Turabian and research writing and formatting, we will talk a bit about this. But the important thing to remember is to just be consistent. If you're using headings on your paper, make sure that all of your headings are uniform and match. If you are indenting the first line of your paragraph, make sure that it's indented the same amount for every paragraph. So make sure that your design is suitable and consistent and hold to it throughout the paper. Make the paragraph the unit of composition. And what this means from Strunk and White is that this is really where the work of your paper comes in. The paragraph is where you compose what it is you want to say about the particular topic. Use the active voice, not the passive voice. This can be a difficult thing. We many times naturally, for whatever reason, will default to the passive voice. Either we're not wanting to be assertive enough, maybe we're not as confident as we need to be, and so we sort of default to the passive voice. It's much better form and style to use the active voice. For example, use I aimed the arrow at the target, not the arrow was aimed at the target by me. You can hear how much clearer I aimed the arrow at the target is than using the passive voice. The passive voice is much more timid, not nearly as direct and clear as using the active voice. Put statements in positive form if possible. If there's a negative that can be stated positively, oftentimes this is better style. And then lastly on this slide, use definite, specific, concrete language. There are times when theoretical language or abstract language is appropriate. We're not saying you can't use metaphors, similes, and so forth. Oftentimes, certain projects require that. But to be clear, you want to use definite, specific, concrete language mostly throughout your writing. Next, we want to look at these several items. We want to omit needless words, and oftentimes this happens in the editing process. Maybe you've already written your paper, you're going to come back and you're going to read through it again and identify with a pen or a highlighter words that you really don't need. Something else that can help with this is letting someone else read your paper before you turn it in. Avoid a succession of loose sentences. If you have 5 sentences that really are not getting to the point, maybe you only need 1 or 2 to really drive home the point instead of just kind of loosely letting the topic linger on. And if you can reduce it to a sentence or 2, then you can maybe put some more substantial sentences around those 1 or 2 sentences to get a full paragraph. Express coordinate ideas in similar form. So if you have an idea here and an idea here, coordinated, you want to help the reader understand the coordination by using similar form. So in each sentence, you want to follow a similar use of subject, use of verb, use of modifiers. You're maybe just saying it a different way to get the point emphasized. Keep related words together. In summaries, keep to one tense. That is, don't go back and forth between past tense, present tense, future tense. Just stick with one tense. And then finally, place the emphatic words of a sentence at the end. Let that emphasis linger a bit with the reader as they move on. In our final section in this writing lab, we want to see what kind of summary statements that Strunk and White have given us with regard to their approach to style. One thing that they note is that you should place yourself in the background. When you are writing a research paper or something of that kind, of that manner, you don't want to use pronouns such as I, me, or we. Remember, you're presenting research. The topic is in the forefront. You are in the background. Now, if you are writing a paper or completing an assignment that is about personal experience, then obviously pronouns like I, me, or we are welcomed, and you are not in the background, but you are in the foreground because it's your personal experience. But if we're doing research on a topic, then it's the topic that needs to be put on center stage. We want to write in a way that comes naturally. It should be clear that this writing came from us. It came from me. It came from you. We should write in a way that our natural style is coming forth. We don't want to use that as an excuse to write poorly, however. We just want our own flavor, our own flair to come to the paper and to the reader. Don't be afraid to use a thesaurus and a dictionary regularly. I can't emphasize this enough. Much of my own academic career has been spent with a thesaurus in one hand and a dictionary in the other. Matter of fact, when I'm reading textbooks for class, if there's a word that I do not know the meaning of, I will make a note of it in the margin and I will go to dictionary.com and look it up. I will oftentimes use a thesaurus to try to bring a more varied vocabulary to something that I'm writing. Write with nouns and verbs. Nouns and verbs are the bedrock, the meat of your paper. In fact, use nouns and verbs to build your outline. This will be really helpful if you're writing an outline before you actually write your paper. go a step further and give yourself a noun and a verb at each point, at each heading. I think it will benefit you when you transition to writing your paragraphs. Revise and rewrite. Revise and rewrite. Editing is an important part for any of a paper for any writer. Do not overwrite. Do not overstate. If we can start off just saying what needs to be said, and then we come back and reread our paper and find a point that really is in need of further elaboration, we can do it at that point. Sometimes we overwrite and overstate on our first way through, and it can bog us down and not allow us to get really to the goal of accomplishing and finishing our paper. Avoid using qualifiers. Instead, back up what you say with good research. Anytime we overqualify, it's oftentimes a sign that maybe we haven't researched this statement as thoroughly as we need to, and we're not quite as confident. Use good footnoting and research to back up what it is you want to say. Do not affect a breezy manner. Now, these aren't my words. These are Strunk and White, and I think what they mean by that is don't be full of hot air. We don't need to blow more hot air into a topic. Just be succinct, be concrete, be specific in what it is that you want to say. Use orthodox spelling. I know there are trends with spelling today that words, especially with things like texting and social media, we see words spelled in ways that they were never meant to be spelled. And that's all good and fine in everyday social media writing or texting and shorthand and so forth. But when we're writing a paper and we're presenting it, for a grade, to a professor, we want to use proper and orthodox spelling, which means we may have to turn to the dictionary. Some of us are great spellers, some of us are not so great spellers. That's why we have the dictionary and the thesaurus, so that we can look up these words and get some assistance. Don't forget also the tools that are available to you in your word processor. So if you are using Microsoft Word, or if you're using Pages on a Macintosh computer, or if you have Grammarly as an app that coordinates with your word processor, you can oftentimes in real time have a help with spelling and grammar and so forth. In our final 2 slides here, as we finish up our talk about an approach to style, do not explain too much. This is especially the case if you're using footnotes. You can make a statement, and if you feel like you really need to say more, but you don't want to bog the reader down, you want the reader to move on in your argument, you can use a footnote to explain further. And if the reader wants to find out a little bit more, they can read the footnote without getting interrupted in their reading of the content, the main content. Do not construct awkward adverbs. We want to avoid awkward modifiers when we can. Make sure the reader knows who is speaking. Don't plagiarize. We have a strict plagiarism policy here at Tri-State Bible College. It's so very important and ethical to give credit to the writers that you quote. If you are putting the content of another writer in your paper and presenting that as your own writing, that is plagiarism. And so we want to make sure that the reader is clear about what is my content, what is the content of the author that I'm quoting, so that they can, so that we can give credit where credit is due to that writer, but also so that the reader can go and learn more about what that writer said. And it demonstrates our own skill in using the writings of others in conjunction with what it is that we want to say and originate from our own thoughts. We want to avoid fancy words unless you're dealing with technical fields of research. There's no reason to multiply fancy words unless it's absolutely essential to the field or topic about which you're writing. Do not use dialects, but rather use standard spelling. Look, being an Appalachian man, I know that we have ways of hearing and saying things in our minds and even in our heart of hearts, but we want in our writing to make sure that we're using standard spelling. So again, it may mean that we have to look it up or get some assistance. Finally, we want to be clear, be as clear as possible. Clarity, clarity, clarity. It's like the old real estate law, location, 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 but in writing, it's clarity, clarity, clarity. We want to avoid injecting our opinion unless it's an opinion paper. But if we're doing research, we're not looking for opinion. We're looking for research and facts and data to back it up, and weaving together the research of others with my own contribution to the topic at hand. Use figures of speech sparingly. Again, this is something that Strunk and White have mentioned elsewhere. Use definite, specific, concrete language. Do not take shortcuts at the cost of clarity. Avoid foreign languages unless your paper directly deals with foreign languages. I mean, if it is a Greek exegesis paper, obviously you're going to be using foreign language. But if it's not, then maybe try to avoid using the foreign languages because your audience may not be equipped to interact and engage those foreign languages. And then finally, prepare the standard to the offbeat. And so what this means is you want to follow the standard. It may feel a little vanilla. It may feel a little mundane. But again, when you stick to the standards of style and elements of usage and composition and so forth, you're giving the reader a bit of what to expect, a consistency that they can depend on. I won't say that there's never a time where you do go offbeat or you bring in an aberration to your style, but it needs to be used very strategically and carefully. Mostly we want to prepare according to the standard. So, thank you so much for watching this first writing lab. I hope it's helpful for you. Like I said, there will be a second writing lab where we will dive into the specifics of Turabian formatting and research writing. We'll talk about such topics as footnoting and bibliography and how to do a cover page as well. So I hope that you'll tune in for that writing lab. Until then, this is Rex Howe, president of Tri-State Bible College. On behalf of the Tri-State Bible College Academic Office, may your writing be blessed and for God's glory.